300 residents were counting down when the utility trucks rolled into Cedar Ridge Christmas Village. Karen Whitmore stood beneath a 40-foot tree, smiling for cameras as thousands of lights blazed across the clubhouse lawn. Then two technicians walked past her, opened the distribution cabinet, and pointed toward a heavy cable disappearing through the trees to Ethan Walker's barn. Karen shouted that the HOA had paid for everything. Ethan watched from beyond the property line. The technician lowered one switch. Half the Christmas village went black. That was the beginning. 6 weeks earlier, Cedar Ridge had looked almost peaceful under the first thin snow of December. Ethan Walker's property sat just beyond the development, where the neat subdivision streets ended and open ground began. His house was modest compared with some of the new homes behind the HOA monument, but the red-sided barn behind it was large, well-kept, and supplied by its own electrical service. A row of old oaks marked most of the boundary. Survey stakes and a split-rail fence made the rest difficult to misunderstand. Ethan had lived beside Cedar Ridge for years without belonging to it. His deed predated the development, his driveway connected to the county road, and he paid no HOA dues. Most residents understood that arrangement perfectly well. They waved when they passed him, occasionally bought firewood from a neighbor who stored equipment on his land, and generally treated the property line as exactly what it was, a line. Karen Whitmore treated lines more like suggestions. That December, she had announced what she called the Cedar Ridge Winter Spectacular, a Christmas festival large enough to attract local news coverage, sponsors, food vendors, and families from surrounding neighborhoods. Within days, box trucks began arriving with metal reindeer, illuminated arches, artificial snow machines, a temporary stage, oversized ornaments, bundled extension assemblies, and a prefabricated 40-foot tree that required a small crane to stand upright. Karen supervised from the clubhouse lawn, cream coat buttoned, clipboard in hand, directing details herself. She stopped delivery drivers, corrected the angle of wreaths, ordered volunteers to move decorative gift boxes 3 feet to the left, then moved them back after seeing the arrangement from the road. Ethan did not care how elaborate the festival became. Cedar Ridge could cover every shrub and lights if it wanted. His only concern came when contractors began parking close to his fence. One afternoon, while returning from town, he noticed two workers standing near the rear corner of his barn. They were still on the HOA side of the boundary, but only barely. One held a measuring wheel. The other was looking toward the barn's exterior electrical panel while speaking into a phone. Beside them sat a thick coil of black cable. Ethan slowed his truck, watched for a moment, then pulled into his driveway. By the time he walked around the barn, the workers had moved back toward the clubhouse. The cable remained near the fence beside several orange cones. He assumed they were measuring a route for temporary lighting along the tree line. Nothing on his side appeared disturbed. The panel door was closed. The fence was intact. Before we continue, if you enjoy stories where patience, evidence, and a little common sense finally catch up with people who think rules do not apply to them, consider subscribing. It helps the channel, and you will want to see where this one goes. For the next several days, the festival grew brighter. Test runs began after sunset. First came the tree, then the arches, then a glowing tunnel that stretched across the clubhouse entrance. Music pulsed from the temporary stage while volunteers walked around with radios checking sections of lights. From his kitchen window, Ethan could see the glow reflected on the snow between the trees. It was impressive, he admitted. Excessive, but impressive. Then, one evening, he heard a low electrical hum near the barn that he did not remember hearing before. He stepped outside with a flashlight. The sound stopped before he reached the rear wall. Across the property line, the Christmas lights went dark at almost the same moment. Ethan stood there for several seconds, looking from the silent barn to the darkened festival grounds. He still had no reason to accuse anyone of anything. But he remembered the two workers, the measuring wheel, and the coil of black cable left beside the fence. For the first time, he wondered why a Christmas contractor needed to measure the distance to his electrical service at all. The answer did not arrive as a confession or a confrontation. It arrived in an envelope from the electric company. Ethan opened the bill at his kitchen table 3 days later and assumed at first that he was reading the wrong line. Winter always raised his usage. The barn had heat in one enclosed work area, and a stock tank heater ran during hard freezes, but the total was far beyond his normal December pattern. He checked the previous year, then the year before that. The difference was not subtle. His first reaction was not to blame Cedar Ridge. Electrical problems could be expensive precisely because they were easy to overlook. A failing water heater could run constantly. A thermostat could stick. A motor could cycle when nobody was watching. Ethan spent the next morning checking every ordinary explanation before considering an extraordinary one. He shut down the barn heater and watched the meter. He checked the water heater, the freezer, the compressor, exterior outlets, lighting circuits, and the small workshop heater. He walked the barn, listened for motors, and checked breakers for heat. Nothing explained the bill. That afternoon, he logged into the utility portal and opened the smart meter history. The dashboard showed daily consumption, but the hourly view was what stopped him. For most of the day, the usage looked normal. Then, around 4:30 or 5 in the afternoon, it climbed sharply. It stayed elevated for several hours and fell again late in the evening. Ethan pulled up the previous week. The pattern repeated. He opened his phone calendar and thought about what had been happening across the trees at those exact times. Cedar Ridge had begun testing the Christmas displays every evening. The glowing tunnel usually came on near dusk. The stage lights followed. The giant tree stayed lit until the volunteers finished their checks. He did not like coincidences that kept appointments. The next evening, Ethan decided not to touch anything. At 4:41 p.m., he opened the meter dashboard on his phone and watched from the barn office. His usage was ordinary. At 4:52, the first row of illuminated arches flickered on across Cedar Ridge. Within minutes, the demand graph began climbing. At 5:03, the giant tree lit. The meter climbed again. Ethan stared at the screen, then walked to the barn door. Through the trees, he could see volunteers moving between displays. A line of red and white lights chased along the clubhouse roof. The stage flashed blue, gold, and green during a lighting test. His meter continued upward. The following night brought something even more useful. Snow began falling hard shortly before sunset, and Cedar Ridge canceled its test session. No arches, no stage, no giant tree. Ethan's electrical demand stayed close to normal all evening. He took screenshots. On Saturday, the weather cleared and the HOA resumed testing. The demand jumped again. More screenshots. By Sunday night, Ethan had 6 days of hourly meter records, laid out beside notes showing when the HOA displays had been active. He marked the times in 2 columns. Christmas lights on. Barn demand high. Christmas lights off. Barn demand normal. It was not proof of a physical connection, but it was enough to tell him that whatever was happening deserved a closer look. He could have walked straight into the HOA office Monday morning and accused Karen of stealing electricity. That would have produced shouting, denial, and probably a neighborhood social media argument before lunch. It would not have produced an answer. Instead, Ethan printed the meter data and placed it in a folder. Then he checked his own records. The barn service had not been modified in years. No electrical contractor had permission to work on his property. No temporary use agreement existed. He had not signed anything for Cedar Ridge because Cedar Ridge had never asked him to sign anything. That left a simple problem. Power appeared to be leaving his service whenever the HOA tested its festival, but Ethan still had not seen the path it was taking. The next morning, before sunrise had fully cleared the tree line, he put on his coat, picked up a flashlight, and walked behind the barn to find it. A fresh inch of snow covered the ground behind the barn, which made the first clue easier to see. Most of the surface was smooth except for a narrow strip running along the rear wall. The snow there had settled unevenly over darker soil, as though someone had opened a shallow trench and pushed everything back into place. Ethan followed it with his flashlight until it reached a weatherproof junction box mounted several feet from the main service panel. The box was supposed to feed 2 exterior barn circuits. Now something else came out of it. A thick black cable dropped from the bottom, ran tight against the siding, then disappeared beneath the disturbed ground. Ethan crouched without touching it. The jacket carried manufacturer markings, conductor information, and a printed serial code. It was heavy-lit temporary power cable designed to carry a serious load. He took photographs before doing anything else. Wide shots showing the box and barn wall, close photographs of the connectors and cable markings, and a frame showing the distance to the nearest survey stake. The cable continued steadily toward the fence. The snow made the route obvious in daylight, turning hidden work into a clean line across the ground. On the other side, Christmas decorations partly hid the route, but Ethan could see it reappear near artificial shrubs around the festival grounds. From there, bundled lines headed toward a temporary distribution cabinet behind the stage. He photographed that too from his side. Then he went inside and opened the barn camera archive. The rear camera watched equipment doors and the fuel shed, but its angle also captured most of the exterior panel. Ethan went back through the previous week until he found the afternoon he had seen the contractors near the fence. At 1:17 p.m., a white work truck backed along the HOA service lane. Its door carried the logo of Brightline Event Power, the company listed on signs around the festival site. 2 workers unloaded cable. For 11 minutes, they remained on the HOA side. Then one stepped through a gap where a fence rail had been removed. The second followed carrying a tool case. One worker approached the barn panel, examined it, then opened the smaller exterior junction box. The video had no useful audio at that distance, but the actions were clear. They worked for nearly 40 minutes, laid cable along the wall, and began cutting the shallow route toward the fence. Nobody from Ethan's property was present. At 2:06, a dark SUV appeared on the HOA lane. Karen Whitmore got out. She stayed on the HOA side, but stood near the opening in the fence and spoke with the workers. One pointed toward the junction box. Karen looked at the barn, checked something on her clipboard, and gave a short nod. Ethan paused the footage. That did not prove what Karen had told the workers. It did prove she had been present while contractors worked on his electrical system. He saved the original recording, exported a copy, and wrote down the camera timestamp. Then he checked the exterior panel for damage. There was no forced entry. The smaller junction box used a standard utility-style latch rather than a keyed lock, explaining how the workers had opened it without breaking anything. The missing fence rail was lying behind festival barriers on the HOA side, placed neatly on the ground, as if someone intended to reinstall it later. Ethan photographed the empty brackets. He still did not cut the cable. Changing the installation might feel satisfying, but it would also alter evidence before anyone independent could inspect it. Instead, he backed up the video, labeled the photographs, and added the cable's serial number to his notes. By noon, his folder contained the bill, smart meter records, photographs of the physical connection and boundary, and video showing Brightline installing the line while Karen watched. The question had changed. It was no longer whether Cedar Ridge was drawing power from Ethan's barn. The cable answered that. Now he wanted to know why a professional contractor had crossed onto private property in daylight and connected to someone else's service as though permission had already been settled. If the workers believed they had permission, who exactly had given it to them? The Cedar Ridge HOA office occupied 2 rooms beside the clubhouse lobby, decorated that week with garland, battery candles, and a sign reading "Community Makes the Season Bright." Ethan arrived shortly after 10 on Monday carrying one folder. Karen Whitmore stood behind the reception counter reviewing a vendor map. She looked up, smiled automatically, then let the smile weaken when she recognized him. "Ethan, if this is about the trucks near your fence, we already moved them. It's about my electrical service." That changed her expression, but not in the way he expected. There was no confusion. Ethan placed a photograph on the counter showing the black cable leaving the junction box on his barn. "Who authorized this connection?" Karen glanced at the image, then exhaled as if he had raised a scheduling problem. "Oh, that." Ethan said nothing. Karen set down her pen. The clubhouse service couldn't support the full festival plan. The stage company needed supplemental capacity, and your barn service was the most practical adjacent source. My service, for a temporary community event. You connected to it without asking me. Karen leaned both palms on the counter. "The festival benefits everyone in this area. It brings people in, improves the neighborhood's reputation, supports home values, and gives families something positive. You live directly beside Cedar Ridge. You benefit whether you pay dues or not. I don't belong to Cedar Ridge. We know that." "Then why am I paying to light Cedar Ridge?" Her tone hardened. "You're not paying for the festival. You're making a temporary contribution to a community event. A contribution is something the contributor agrees to." Karen gave a small laugh. "It's Christmas. We're talking about a few weeks of electricity, not an easement across your living room." Ethan opened the folder and placed the meter data beside the photograph. "This is not a few decorative bulbs. You're making this adversarial for no reason. No. I'm asking who authorized work on my property. I just explained why it was necessary. That isn't what I asked." Karen stopped trying to sound cheerful. "The board approved the festival infrastructure. The board owns my barn? Don't be ridiculous. Then show me the permission that lets its contractor connect to my service." Karen folded her arms. "You were notified. When? There were planning notices. Notices are not permission. Your property is adjacent to the event zone. That still isn't permission." A volunteer nearby had stopped sorting raffle tickets. Karen noticed and lowered her voice. "Every family contributes something, Ethan. Nobody else is turning Christmas into an invoice." Ethan did not raise his voice. "How much power are you drawing?" Karen hesitated. "That depends on the display cycle." "So you know you're drawing it. I know there is a temporary supplemental connection to my account. Again, temporary. Show me what I signed." Karen's face changed. It was small, but Ethan saw it. Not fear. Calculation. "What? You keep saying this was approved. Show me the document with my signature." Karen picked up the photograph, studied it, then placed it down carefully. "We have authorization on file. Good. I'd like a copy. I don't personally maintain every contractor document. Who does? Our management, records, and project vendors. Then get it from them. Karen's mouth tightened. I am not stopping festival preparations so you can conduct some personal audit. I didn't ask you to stop anything. I'm asking for a signature. The volunteer suddenly became very interested in her raffle tickets again. Karen gathered the papers in front of her. Management will send you whatever is appropriate. When? When they locate the file. Ethan slid the photograph and meter printout back into his folder. Until then, nobody touches that cable or my panel. Karen looked toward the wreath over the lobby doors. You really want to make a fight over this during the holidays? Ethan closed the folder. No, I want to see what I signed. He left before she could turn the argument back toward Christmas spirit. Outside, the lighted candy canes along the clubhouse walk flickered on one after another. Ethan checked the utility app on his phone. His barn demand had just begun climbing. Karen said authorization existed. If that was true, the next question was worse than the cable itself, because Ethan knew he had never signed it. Ethan called a licensed electrician that afternoon. He did not ask the man to disconnect anything. He asked him to inspect the barn service, document what he saw, and leave the installation as found unless an immediate danger required action. Daniel Price arrived the next morning with a meter, camera, and enough professional skepticism to avoid conclusions before opening a panel. He traced the known barn circuits, compared breaker labels with actual loads, and examined the added junction connection. Within 15 minutes, his expression changed. This isn't part of your original layout. I know. I mean, it isn't even a clean temporary tie-in to a dedicated spare circuit. Daniel photographed the conductors and checked cable specifications before walking the route toward the boundary. How much are they running over there? Tree, stage, arches, vendor area, maybe more. Daniel looked through the trees. That explains the cable size. The problem was not simply that somebody had connected without permission. The added load had been placed on a service arrangement never designed around the festival's temporary distribution plan. Protection existed, but not in the configuration Daniel would have approved for a public event feeding multiple downstream systems. Could it work? Ethan asked. It is working, Daniel said. That's not the same as being designed, permitted, and protected correctly. He pointed to the junction hardware. This is substantial temporary power. Whoever installed it expected real demand. This is not somebody plugging in 3 strings of lights. Daniel compared his clamp meter reading with Ethan's smart meter records while Cedar Ridge ran an afternoon test. When the giant tree switched on, the reading rose almost exactly as the utility graph had shown. There's your festival. Ethan asked him to put his observations in writing. Daniel agreed, but kept the language precise. He documented what was present, which service it used, what load he could verify, and which approvals he had not seen. He did not accuse the HOA of theft or claim to know who ordered the work. That distinction really mattered to Ethan. By lunchtime, Ethan had something more useful than anger, an independent professional record. His next call went to North Valley Electric, the utility that owned the meter and served the property. The first representative treated it as a billing dispute until Ethan explained the real issue. A temporary event power cable has been connected downstream of my barn service and crosses the property boundary to an HOA festival. I did not authorize it. The representative paused. Did you install the connection? No. Did an electrician working for you install it? No. Is the line active now? Yes. The call was transferred. A second representative opened a service case and asked Ethan to upload photographs, meter history, property information, the electrician's contact details, and a description of where the line left his service. Then came the important question. Have you disconnected it? No. Do not alter it before inspection unless there is an emergency condition. We need to document what is present. That confirmed Ethan's decision to leave the cable alone. He uploaded the files while still on the phone. The representative gave him a case number and said a field investigator would contact him. Less than an hour later, Daniel emailed his written findings. Ethan added them to the case. That evening, Cedar Ridge conducted another full lighting test. The festival glowed beyond the trees. Music drifted from the stage. Volunteers cheered when the giant tree completed a synchronized color sequence. Inside the barn office, Ethan watched the electrical demand climb again. But now the numbers belonged to an official utility case. The following morning, North Valley requested photographs showing the barn, property boundary, and temporary distribution area. Ethan sent them, along with the Brightline truck image and installation timestamp from his camera footage. The response came 20 minutes later. Do not contact or disturb the installation further. Field review scheduled. Ethan printed the message and added it to his folder. A week earlier, the problem had been an expensive electric bill. Now it had a case number, time-stamped footage, a licensed electrician's report, and a utility investigator asking who had authorized power across a property line. Brightline was a professional event contractor. Professional contractors created proposals, invoices, work orders, and approvals. Somewhere, Ethan realized, there had to be a paper trail explaining why they believed they were allowed to use his barn. The paper trail began with documents Cedar Ridge had already circulated to its own residents. Ethan was not entitled to private HOA files, so he did not pretend otherwise. He started with public festival notices, sponsor packets, meeting summaries residents had posted, and budget pages distributed during an open holiday planning session. Most of it looked ordinary: tree rental, stage equipment, portable restrooms, security, insurance, lighting installation, and temporary distribution. One line did not: supplemental power access. The amount was small compared with the rest of the festival budget, but no location was listed. The same page showed a separate estimate for generator rental, marked as not selected. That caught Ethan's attention. A Cedar Ridge resident named Paul Jensen had spoken with Ethan several times over the years. Paul was not interested in neighborhood politics, but he had attended the budget meeting because the board had raised the holiday assessment. When Ethan asked whether residents had received vendor detail, Paul searched his email and forwarded the packet. Attached was a Brightline event power invoice. Ethan read it twice. The invoice included stage distribution, lighting circuits, weatherproof cable ramps, installation labor, and one line that made the entire situation clearer: adjacent agricultural service, owner authorization on file. Ethan printed the page. Ethan noticed the invoice carried a reference number and a revision date from before the workers appeared at his barn. That mattered because the power source had not been improvised that day. Someone had planned it, priced it, and represented it as available early enough for Brightline to build around it. Paul checked the meeting packet again and found no attachment naming Ethan, no map identifying his barn, and no line showing reimbursement to a property owner. The silence in the paperwork was becoming evidence of its own by then. Brightline had not written unapproved connection. Its paperwork said the owner had authorized it. That did not excuse workers crossing onto his land, but it suggested they might have arrived believing the permission question had already been resolved by their client. Paul called back 5 minutes later. "Is that your barn they mean?" "It appears to be." "You gave them permission?" "No." There was a long silence. "Then who told the contractor you did?" That was exactly the question. Paul remembered something else. During the budget meeting, a board member had asked why generator rental disappeared from the final plan. Karen answered that the electrical team had found adjacent supplemental capacity that would keep the event under budget. "Did she say where?" Ethan asked. "No, everybody assumed it was another HOA circuit." "Did anyone vote specifically to use my property?" "Not that I heard." Paul forwarded the meeting notes as well. The notes contained no authorization from Ethan, no easement, and no property address. They did show the board approving the overall festival budget based on numbers Karen and the event committee presented. Ethan began to see two separate layers. The board may have approved spending for the festival. That did not mean the board knew its president had represented a private electrical service as available. He sent the invoice and meeting packet to the North Valley investigator without commentary beyond one sentence. "I did not provide the owner authorization referenced here." By evening, the investigator confirmed receipt. Meanwhile, word began moving through Cedar Ridge. Paul had apparently asked another board member whether she remembered approving electrical access to Ethan's barn. She did not. A second board member said she thought Brightline had arranged its own generator system. Karen responded quickly. She sent a message to the board saying there was confusion regarding a temporary neighboring service agreement, and that management had the matter under control. The phrase neighboring service agreement reached Ethan through Paul. Ethan searched his records again. No agreement. No email requesting one. No text message. No phone call. No check, credit, reimbursement, or even a note telling him contractors would enter his property. The scope of the problem had expanded without becoming complicated. At first, Ethan thought somebody had taken power from his barn. Then he learned a professional contractor installed the line while Karen watched. Now he had an invoice stating that owner authorization existed and board members who did not appear to know where that authorization came from. The question was no longer who physically pulled the cable. Brightline had done that. The question was who told Brightline that Ethan Walker had said yes. North Valley Electric arrived 2 mornings later in a white utility truck followed by a smaller service vehicle. The field investigator introduced himself as Marcus Hale. A technician named Luis carried test equipment and a camera. Both men asked Ethan to walk them through the property before they touched anything. Ethan showed them the meter, main service, barn panel, added junction connection, cable route, survey markers, and camera angle. He gave Marcus the electrician's report, but let the utility perform its own review. Luis photographed every stage of the connection. He checked conductor markings, breaker configuration, load, and the point where the temporary cable crossed towards Cedar Ridge. He placed a numbered evidence tag beside one connector for photographs, then examined the seal and hardware around the service equipment. Marcus asked one question several times in different forms. Marcus compared the cable route with Ethan's markers. The line crossed the boundary, entered Ethan's service, and returned toward the festival. Luis photographed both sides so nobody could claim the source belonged to Cedar Ridge. Karen watched them document the stakes and asked whether this was necessary. Marcus answered that the record had to show what existed before anyone changed it. Did North Valley approve any temporary event service from this account? No record showed that it had. Did you authorize another customer or event operator to use power from this service? No. Did you sign a temporary service agreement? No. Marcus wrote each answer down. Then the two utility employees crossed to the HOA side through the public clubhouse entrance rather than stepping over Ethan's fence. Karen met them outside before they reached the temporary cabinet. Ethan stayed back unless Marcus asked for him. He wanted the inspection to belong to North Valley, not look like a confrontation he had staged. Karen immediately described the cable as a temporary seasonal arrangement between neighboring properties. Marcus asked, "Who owns the source service?" "Mr. Walker." "Whose name is on the utility account?" "Mr. Walker's, presumably." "Who authorized the connection?" "The owner did." "We have documentation." Marcus held out his hand. "I need the original authorization and any permit or utility approval associated with the installation." Karen did not produce either one. She said the records were maintained by management and Brightline. Marcus replied that Brightline's invoice already referenced owner authorization, which meant someone should be able to show it. Karen changed tactics. "This is temporary. It will be removed after Christmas. The duration doesn't answer the authorization question. This event serves hundreds of residents. The number of residents doesn't change whose service this is." Karen looked toward Ethan. "He is turning a billing disagreement into a spectacle." Marcus did not look at Ethan. "This is a field review of an unverified connection. If you have authorization, provide it." The exchange lasted less than 10 minutes, but several volunteers nearby heard enough to stop working. Luis continued inspecting the distribution cabinet. He traced which festival circuits were being fed through the line from Ethan's side and documented the load while sections of the display were tested. When he finished, he showed Marcus the photographs and readings privately. Marcus returned to Karen with a written notice. North Valley had found no utility record approving the connection. The HOA had until the afternoon before opening night to produce valid owner authorization and any required approvals, or disconnect the temporary feed and move the festival load to a lawful source. Karen stared at the notice. "You're threatening to shut down Christmas over paperwork? I'm giving you time to correct an unauthorized electrical arrangement before a public event." "It is not unauthorized." "Then provide the authorization." Karen folded the notice and put it into her clipboard. "You'll have it." Before leaving, Luis returned to the barn side and took one final close photograph of the connection seal and fasteners. He marked the image number on his field sheet. Ethan noticed but did not ask why. Marcus gave him the updated case number and repeated the instruction not to alter the line himself. The trucks pulled away before noon. Across the lawn, Karen stood beside the giant artificial tree with the utility notice in one hand and her phone in the other. That evening, Cedar Ridge ran its lights again. The cable remained connected. The deadline was now less than 48 hours away, and Karen had made her position clear. She was not preparing to remove the line. She was preparing to prove that Ethan had agreed to it. The document arrived by email the next morning. Subject: Temporary surface offer remortion. Ethan opened the attachment at his kitchen table. The form carried his name, the general description of his property, and language granting Cedar Ridge temporary access to available agricultural electrical service for holiday operations. At the bottom was a signature that appeared at a quick glance to read Ethan Walker. Karen's message above it contained one sentence. "As previously explained, your authorization is already on file." Ethan did not reply immediately. He printed the document and began reading it as if it belonged to someone else. The property description called his barn lot parcel 17B. His county record used a different designation. The form referred to a rear access easement, which did not exist. There was no witness line completed and no contractor acknowledgement. Then he looked at the date. November 28. Ethan opened his calendar. On November 28, he had been 2 counties away helping his brother move equipment from a storage building. Fuel receipts and a hardware store purchase placed him there for most of the day. More important, the barn camera showed bright line beginning installation several days before the date on the authorization. According to Karen's document, Ethan had approved a connection after the contractor had already started building it. He sent the file to Marcus Hale with a short note identifying the date conflict and attached the original camera timestamp. He did not accuse Karen of forging anything. He simply asked North Valley to verify the document's source. Karen was less restrained. By noon, Cedar Ridge's community page carried a message from the HOA about last-minute interference from a neighboring property owner threatening a cherished family tradition. Ethan's name was not used, but nobody near the development needed help guessing who the neighboring owner was. Comments appeared quickly. Some residents asked why a private owner was involved in HOA power at all. Others repeated Karen's framing that one man was trying to ruin Christmas. A few demanded that Ethan just let the kids have one night. Ethan did not answer a single comment. The social media pressure continued after noon. One resident said Ethan should donate power as a Christmas gift. Another asked why the HOA never told owners a barn supplied the festival. That question spread. Board members asked whether dues funded a connection the owner denied approving. Karen deleted cable comments, but screenshots circulated. Ethan saved them to preserve the timeline of her claims. At 1:20, Karen called him. "You received the authorization." "I did. So this needs to stop. The utility is reviewing it." Karen's voice sharpened. "There is nothing to review. You signed an agreement. I've asked them to verify it. You are intentionally jeopardizing an event we have spent months preparing. I'm not running the investigation. You started it. I reported a connection to my electric service that I did not authorize. You did authorize it. Then North Valley will have no problem confirming that." Karen went quiet. When she spoke again, the Christmas language disappeared. "If your complaint causes financial damage to this association, the board will consider every legal option available. Send anything like that in writing." She hung up. 10 minutes later, Ethan saved the call log. Then he reviewed the camera footage one more time. He exported the original clip showing Brightline workers opening the junction box, Karen arriving, and the installation occurring before the date printed on the authorization. He also located footage from November 28. Nothing happened at the barn that day. No Karen, no HOA representative, no signing, no meeting. That did not prove where a piece of paper had been created, but it made the timeline harder to explain. Marcus called late that afternoon. "We've requested the contractor's copy." "Of the authorization?" "Yes. I want to compare what they received before installation with what the HOA sent us yesterday." Ethan understood immediately. If Brightline had relied on owner approval, its project file should contain the version it relied on at the time. Karen had produced a document. Now the question was whether it was the same document everyone else had seen. Opening night was the next evening. Across the trees, Cedar Ridge turned on every display for one final rehearsal. Ethan's meter climbed higher than it had all month. He watched the graph rise and thought about Karen's warning that he was ruining Christmas. But the lights were still on, the cable was still connected, and somewhere between the contractor's records and the HOA office, 2 versions of the truth were about to meet. Marcus called Ethan at 9:06 the morning of opening day. "We received Brightline's project file." Ethan set down his coffee. "And the authorization they received is not the same document the HOA sent us." Marcus did not speculate beyond that. He asked Ethan to remain available and said North Valley would contact Cedar Ridge again before the deadline. An hour later, a Brightline project manager named Rachel Kim called Ethan with Marcus copied into the conversation. Her tone was careful. "I want to be clear about our role. Our crew was told owner access had been approved by the client before mobilization." "What did they give you?" Ethan asked. Rachel emailed the project packet. The form inside used nearly the same language as Karen's version, but the details were different. The date was earlier. The property description was shorter. Most importantly, the signature area did not contain Ethan's handwritten signature. It contained a typed notation, Kobel secured, Koa to maintain wrecker. Brightline had never received the signed form Karen sent to North Valley. Rachel also provided the email chain. A Brightline estimator had written to the HOA event committee 3 weeks earlier. "Please confirm written approval from adjacent property owner before we connect to agricultural service." The reply came from Karen's HOA email account. "Owner approval secured. Proceed with the supplemental feed. We will retain authorization in association records." There it was. Brightline had asked the correct question. Karen had answered it. The contractor still faced questions about entering Ethan's land without meeting him, but the paper trail showed why the crew believed permission already existed. Karen tried to reverse the blame before noon. In a conference call with North Valley and Brightline, she argued that the contractor was responsible for verifying access on site. Rachel answered with the proposal, the email, and the client instruction. Our contract required the client to secure property authorization. We requested confirmation. Your office confirmed it. Karen said the response had been based on a verbal understanding. Marcus asked why the signed form she later provided carried a date after installation began. Karen called that an administrative cleanup. Then why is it different from the form Brightline had in its file? It is the completed version. Completed by whom? Silence. Marcus asked again. Karen said she would need to speak with management counsel. The call ended shortly afterward. Marcus ended the call by reminding everyone that the deadline had not moved. Whatever explanations remained unresolved. The next piece came from inside the board. Paul Jensen contacted Ethan and said a board member, Susan Bell, had remembered a discussion from the November budget meeting. The original festival estimate included several $1,000s for large generator units. Karen had told the board that expense could be removed because the event team had located free adjacent access with enough capacity for the decorative load. Susan had assumed Karen meant an HOA-owned service point near the maintenance shed. Other members apparently assumed the same thing. Nobody recalled being told the free access belonged to Ethan. The motive suddenly looked embarrassingly simple. Generators cost money. Ethan's electricity appeared free because the bill went somewhere else. Removing the generator line kept Karen's signature Christmas event within the budget she had publicly promised. North Valley gave Cedar Ridge one final instruction before leaving the matter to opening night enforcement. Move the festival circuits to an approved source before the stated deadline, or the unauthorized feed would be isolated. There was still time. Brightline could bring temporary generators. The HOA could reduce the display load. Karen could admit the mistake, reimburse Ethan, and salvage most of the festival. For several hours, Ethan believed that was what would happen. No contractor returned to his barn. No one from the HOA called him. Around 3 in the afternoon, generator trucks did not appear either. Instead, volunteers began arriving in Christmas sweaters. Food vendors opened their trailers. A local choir tested microphones on the stage. Camera crews from a community news station set up near the 40-foot tree. At 3:42, Ethan opened his utility dashboard. The demand from the barn was already rising. At 4:05, the arches came on. At 4:11, the tree lit. At 4:18, the stage began its full lighting sequence. Karen had received the contractor file, the utility warning, and the final deadline. She had not disconnected anything. Ethan looked through the trees at the growing crowd and understood her gamble. Karen believed that once hundreds of families, sponsors, vendors, and cameras were standing beneath those lights, North Valley Electric would not dare be the company that turned Christmas off. By 5:30, Cedar Ridge looked like a postcard designed by someone with no budget limit and no fear of extension cables. The entrance arch glowed red and gold. Artificial snow drifted from machines near the clubhouse. Vendors sold cocoa beneath strings of warm lights. The temporary stage flashed through a synchronized program, while the giant tree shifted from white to green to red. Cars filled both visitor lots. A cold wind crossed the lawn as Christmas music began near the stage. Karen moved through the crowd with a wireless microphone, greeting sponsors and directing volunteers as though the utility deadline had never existed. She wore a red coat over a white turtleneck and stopped repeatedly for photographs beneath the Cedar Ridge Winter Spectacular sign. From his property, Ethan could hear the choir warming up. He had no intention of walking over and pulling a breaker. That mattered. If he cut the feed himself 5 minutes before the ceremony, Karen would spend the next year telling everyone he had sabotaged a community event. More importantly, North Valley had specifically told him not to alter the installation before its enforcement decision. So Ethan stayed near the barn with the case file in his truck and waited. At 5:47, 2 North Valley vehicles turned into Cedar Ridge. The first was Marcus Hale's field truck. The second carried Luis and another technician. Karen saw them before most residents did. She handed her microphone to a volunteer and intercepted Marcus near the service lane. "You cannot do this now." Marcus looked toward the temporary cabinet. "Has the unauthorized feed been disconnected? This is a community event. There are hundreds of people here." "That was not my question." Karen lowered her voice. "We provided the paperwork. You provided a document that does not match the contractor file, and we have no verified authorization from the account holder. Council is reviewing it. The deadline passed." Karen stepped closer. If your company causes this event to fail, everybody here will know exactly who did it." Marcus remained expressionless. "Our job is not to decide whether your event succeeds. Our job is to determine whether an electrical service is being used with authorization and in compliance with our requirements." A local reporter nearby noticed the utility trucks and turned her camera crew toward the conversation. Karen noticed that too. Her posture changed instantly. She smiled toward the reporter, then spoke louder. "This is a minor administrative disagreement that has already been resolved." Marcus did not perform for the camera. He called Luis over and asked for a load verification. The technicians walked to the temporary distribution cabinet behind the stage. They checked the circuits, compared the field condition with their prior photographs, and confirmed the feed from Ethan's barn remained active. Luis then walked the cable route toward the trees. The marked seal and hardware appeared unchanged. Ethan watched from beyond the boundary until Marcus motioned for him to come closer. "Mr. Walker, one question. Since our last inspection, have you authorized Cedar Ridge to use your service tonight?" "No." "Have you signed any agreement since then?" "No." Karen turned toward Ethan. "You could end this right now. I already answered the question. Hundreds of families are here because we planned this for months." Ethan looked around the festival. "Then you had months to arrange power." A few residents close enough to hear exchanged glances. Karen's voice rose. "This man is deliberately withholding electricity from a community celebration." Marcus corrected her before Ethan could respond. "The electricity is billed through his private service. The issue is not that he is withholding HOA property. The issue is that the HOA is currently using a connection we cannot verify as authorized." That sentence changed the crowd's attention. People who had heard only that a neighbor was threatening the Christmas festival now began asking different questions. "Wait, it's his meter? They connected to his barn? Did he know?" Karen heard them and tried to move the conversation away from the crowd. "Marcus, please. 5 minutes. We can discuss this in the office. The technical condition is outside. The ceremony was scheduled for 6. At 5:56, the MC announced that the countdown would begin shortly. Children gathered around the giant tree. Phones rose into the air. The choir stepped into position. The news camera framed Karen near the stage. Marcus reviewed the field sheet, looked at Luis, and gave a small nod. Luis put on insulated gloves and walked toward the disconnect, serving the unauthorized temporary feed. Karen followed him. "You are not seriously going to shut down Christmas in front of all these people?" Luis did not answer. He opened the enclosure. The crowd began counting before Karen could stop it. 10, 9, 8. The giant tree pulsed brighter with each number. The stage lights swept across the lawn. The entrance arch chased red and white toward the clubhouse roof. 7, 6, 5. Luis checked the circuit identification one last time. 4, 3. Karen was still speaking to Marcus. 2, 1. Cheers broke across the lawn. Luis lowered the disconnect. The effect was immediate. The tunnel went dark first. Half the arches vanished, stage lights died, and most of the giant tree went black. Vendor lights, clubhouse windows, and parking lot poles remained on. North Valley had not shut down the neighborhood. It had isolated the circuits fed from Ethan's barn. The distinction was visible to everyone. For 2 seconds, the crowd was silent. Then people began talking all at once. Karen stared at the darkened display, as if someone had erased half her event. "What did you do?" Marcus answered evenly. "We isolated an unauthorized temporary feed after notice and deadline. This is outrageous. You were provided an opportunity to move the load. I gave you the authorization. The document has not been verified, and the account holder denies signing it." Brightline's project manager, Rachel Kim, had arrived 20 minutes earlier after learning North Valley might enforce the deadline. She stepped forward when Karen turned toward the contractor crew. "This is your installation," Karen said. "Fix it." Rachel shook her head. "Our installation was based on your office confirming owner approval. We are not reconnecting a disputed private service." Karen pointed at her. "You had a responsibility to verify access. We asked for verification. Your email said it was secured." Several board members were now close enough to hear. Susan Bell looked at Karen. "You told us the supplemental source was approved." "It was." "By Ethan?" Karen did not answer directly. This is not the time for a board argument. It became the time when the utility trucks arrived at our Christmas festival. The local reporter moved closer. "What exactly was connected to whose property?" she asked Marcus. Marcus kept his answer narrow. "We found temporary event circuits being supplied from a private customer service. We requested authorization. We were unable to verify authorization from the account holder before the deadline, so that temporary feed has been isolated." The reporter turned to Ethan. "Did you know the HOA was using your electricity?" "Not until my bill and meter data changed." "Did you give permission?" "No." Karen stepped between them. He was fully aware this was a community project. Ethan looked at her. Knowing a festival exists is not the same as giving it my electric service. A few people in the crowd murmured agreement. Karen lowered her voice again. Ethan, fine. You made your point. Give permission for tonight. Just tonight. We will sort out the paperwork tomorrow. It was the first time she had actually asked him. Ethan looked toward the dark arches, then toward the barn behind the trees. Christmas generosity is voluntary, he said. So is permission. Karen stared at him. He did not smile. That made the line land harder than if he had celebrated. The festival did not collapse. Cedar Ridge still had legitimate power for the clubhouse, several vendor areas, parking lights, and smaller displays. But the enormous synchronized show Karen had promised could not operate at full capacity. Brightline began discussing emergency options with board members. 2 large mobile generators were available from a rental yard 40 minutes away, but delivering them during a holiday weekend, after hours with technicians on standby, would cost far more than the original generator estimate Karen had removed from the budget. Susan asked for the number. Rachel gave it. Susan closed her eyes briefly. That's almost triple what we rejected in November. Karen said they had no choice. Susan looked at her. We had a choice. You told us we had free power. That sentence traveled faster through the nearby residents than any official explanation. Free power. People looked toward Ethan's barn. Within an hour, the emergency generators arrived with flashing amber lights. Brightline disconnected affected festival circuits from the disputed feed and transferred selected loads to the generators under a revised temporary plan. The choir performed late. The giant tree eventually lit again, though not with every programmed effect. Children still drank cocoa. Families still took photographs. Christmas had not been destroyed. It had simply become expensive for the people who actually ordered it. At 8:14 p.m., Ethan checked his utility dashboard. For the first time on a full festival night, the barn demand was normal. Across the trees, the generators rumbled, and every minute they ran came with an invoice addressed to Cedar Ridge, not Ethan Walker. The story did not end when the lights went dark. The paperwork continued after the generators were removed. North Valley reviewed Ethan's meter history against the documented festival schedule. The utility did not simply declare every December kilowatt-hour stolen. It isolated the abnormal period tied to the temporary feed, compared it with prior usage, and created an adjustment process separating the disputed consumption from Ethan's ordinary costs. Cedar Ridge ultimately reimbursed the event-related amount and Ethan's reasonable inspection expense. The money mattered less than the record. Brightline gave the HOA board its project correspondence. The emails showed the contractor had asked whether owner permission existed before installation and received written confirmation from Karen's office that it did. Brightline's file, however, never contained the signed authorization later sent to North Valley. That difference triggered an internal review. Susan Bell and 2 other board members requested every version of the temporary service form, budget revisions, vendor communications, and notes concerning the generator decision. They asked the management company to preserve electronic records so the dispute would not become an argument based on memory. The review did not uncover a vast criminal empire. It did not need to. It uncovered something smaller and more believable. Karen promised a Christmas event while hiding its power cost. When generator rental threatened the budget, she treated Ethan's capacity as free. She told Brightline approval existed, told the board power was secured, then produced a form whose date did not match the installation timeline. The association's attorney advised the board to stop public accusations against Ethan while the document issue was reviewed. The social media post about a neighboring owner threatening Christmas disappeared. A replacement message said Cedar Ridge was reviewing procedural failures related to temporary event infrastructure. Residents noticed the change. Karen argued that the festival succeeded. The board's concern was simpler. Could a president commit the association to private property, claim permission existed, then blame the owner when it could not be verified at all? At a January meeting, Susan summarized the issue in one sentence. The question is not whether the Christmas festival was popular. The question is whether popularity allowed us to skip consent. It did not. Karen lost the board's support and was removed from the president's role under association procedures. The document dispute went through the appropriate review channels, while the board focused on fixing the controls that had allowed one officer's assurance to substitute for actual authorization. New rules required verification for work touching land outside HOA ownership. Temporary power plans identified the source account and payer. Large contracts required 2 board approvals. Those changes were less dramatic than opening night, but more likely to prevent the same mistake. By February, the black cable was gone. The fence rail had been restored. Daniel returned once to confirm the added connection was properly removed, and the barn system returned to its prior configuration. The following December, Cedar Ridge held another Christmas festival. It was smaller in some ways and better organized in others. The board rented generators in advance. Brightline returned under a contract listing every approved service source. The decorations stopped at the Cedar Ridge boundary. No cable crossed beneath Ethan's fence. On opening night, Ethan stood in his barn doorway while light snow drifted across the field. A simple string of warm white bulbs ran along his roofline. Beyond the oaks, Cedar Ridge glowed again, with generators faintly audible in the distance. Ethan did not resent the festival. He never had. That was what Karen missed from the beginning. The conflict was never between one man and Christmas. It was between permission and assumption. Community spirit does not erase property lines. A good cause does not turn consent into an inconvenience. The moment an organization decides its purpose is important enough to skip permission, it stops asking neighbors to participate and starts treating them as resources. Ethan never needed to shout louder than Karen, cut the cable himself, embarrass volunteers, or ruin an evening for families who had nothing to do with the decision. He kept the bill. He checked the meter. He photographed the cable. He saved the footage. He asked for the document. Then he let each piece of evidence force the next question. A strange bill exposed a cable. The cable led to an invoice, the invoice to an authorization claim, and the claim to records showing how for the community made Ethan pay for a choice he never made. Ethan closed the barn door, leaving his own Christmas lights shining above it. Across the property line, Cedar Ridge remained bright too, powered legally, budgeted honestly, and connected only to sources that had actually agreed to be used. This time, the line between neighborly generosity and entitlement was visible even in the dark.